we'll leave it at that. We'll come back to that later. Just a nice picture of an apparition here to set the theme for tonight's talk. What's the best way of speaking with us? Head on? Like that? It's a bit poppy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right if I just project? Okay, so while we have this nice picture of the apparition behind us, I'll just give you a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'll start off by explaining how I got into parapsychology and a bit about the background of the Koestler Parapsychology Unit and how it came to be in Edinburgh. And then I'm going to give an example of the kind of work that we do at the KPU. Come in. There's seats down the front if you want. And that will be a description of a project that we did for Edinburgh Science Festival called The Science of Ghosts, which we did last year, a collaborative project with Richard Wiseman. So I'm going to go through that, tell you about that project, give you some of the results of it, and talk a little bit about the psychology of ghostly experiences. What is it that leads people to believe that they've had ghostly experiences? And I'll finish off the description of the Great Talon Castle investigation. I bet you can't wait to hear about that. So, first of all, maybe for a parapsychologist nothing is ever truly a coincidence, but for me, my first contact with the Koestler Parapsychology Unit came as I was doing my final degree exams at St Andrews University when I was an undergraduate psychology student. And we had this thing at St Andrews, which we also have at Edinburgh, called the General Paper, where you're asked questions you can't really prepare for about things that are happening in psychology or about psychology as a discipline. And the following question came up, which I answered. Arthur Koestler left a bequest for parapsychology research at Edinburgh University. Imagine you're applying for a post there. Describe your research programme. So that was St Andrews showing themselves to be very open-minded, because this is one of the questions on which I answered this question. This is one of the questions that they judged students on during their general paper in the psychology degree exam the year that I graduated. So that was my first introduction. The reason this was put into the general paper was because at that time, 1984, there was a lot of publicity in the press about the Koestler Chair of Parapsychology, which was coming to Edinburgh University. So just to give you a bit of background about what we now call the KPU, the Koestler Parapsychology Unit. In 1983, Arthur Koestler and his wife Cynthia Koestler committed suicide in a suicide pact. And it was quite controversial at the time because Arthur Koestler was terminally ill, but Cynthia was young and quite healthy. And so some people have accused Koestler of being bullying and misogynistic, and other people have said that Cynthia just couldn't bear the thought of living without him, and that was why she killed herself. The truth we'll probably never know. But the upshot of it was that they left their will, their inheritance, the entire estate, to found a chair of parapsychology at a British university. And this was advertised, and a few universities expressed an interest, but the only one that seriously expressed an interest was Edinburgh University. And I think probably the reason for that was that we'd had a parapsychologist at Edinburgh for probably about 20 years already, in the form of Dr. John Beloff, who was a psychologist who was particularly interested in the philosophy of mind and in mind-brain duality. So he was a dualist, which is a bit of a rarity nowadays. And he'd been doing parapsychology at Edinburgh for years. He'd been supervising students doing parapsychology projects at undergraduate level and PhD students doing parapsychology-based PhDs. And I think for that reason, Edinburgh wasn't afraid of the thought of having parapsychology under its auspices. It already knew that parapsychology could be studied in a responsible scientific way within the psychology department. So it wasn't as nervous at the prospect as some other universities might be, who've never had any personal contact with the subject before. So I think that's a very important reason why Edinburgh ended up having the Koestler chair. And John Beloff was on the selection panel, and he played quite an important role. There was a bit of a tussle between people who really didn't want any parapsychology to happen at all in Edinburgh, and people who felt that yes, it's very important we have some psi research happening at Edinburgh, as well as the what's not psychic but looks like it. And I think a very clever choice was made in the choice of Bob Morris, who came as the Koestler professor at the end of 1985, an American psychologist who'd always trod a very careful line between appealing both to skeptics and to strong proponents, believers in the paranormal. Whenever he gave a lecture, if any of you ever saw him lecture, he always spent at least the first half of the lecture talking about what's not psychic but looks like it. And he thought it was very important to study the psychology of deception and pseudosci, what he calls pseudosci. And he had amongst the students that he recruited students who were looking at how we can be deceived about the reality of the paranormal. So, for example, Richard Wiseman did his PhD at Edinburgh under the supervision of Bob Morris. So I came along very shortly after that. So I graduated in 1984. I heard that Bob Morris got appointed, and I just wrote to him. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I wrote to Bob and I said, well, if you ever need any help, I've got some, I can touch type. So I can even do shorthand actually, so if you need any secretarial help, let me know. And Bob got back to me and said, well, one of the things he did, which was revolutionary at the time in Scotland, was he called me Ms. Watt. And I was very impressed by that, because mostly it was Miss or Mrs. in those days, so Ms. Watt. And he said, I'm going to be advertising for an RA, and why don't you apply? So in due course, he advertised, I applied, and I got the job. So I was a research associate. Whilst being an RA, I also did a part-time PhD. And once I got my PhD, then I became a research fellow. So I had a long time, probably about 16 years, as in short-term contracts doing research posts, but continuously employed. And then sadly, in 2004, Bob Morris died completely unexpectedly. And the KPU was restructured. In other words, those of us who were there were made redundant, and our jobs were advertised on the open market. We had to compete with each other, with my friends and colleagues, for a smaller number of posts. And to cut a very long story short, it took about a year and a half. I got a few more grey hairs as a result of that. Myself and Peter Lamont were appointed to lectureships. So how the KPU stands now is that we have 2 permanent members of staff, permanent as in we have lectureships rather than short-term research posts. And we have, where possible, we have PhD students who are working with us. So we're basically now a research group. There was an attempt to reappoint a new professor, which is a long story, but the decision was taken in the end that none of the applicants were really strong enough to warrant the title of professor at Edinburgh University Psychology Department. So at the moment we don't have a professor, we have two lecturers. So that's what the KPU is at the minute, research group, and this is the remit that we work to. This is how parapsychology was defined in the agreement that was made between the university and come there, sit down in front here for don't be nervous. The trustees of the Koestler estate who were deciding where, negotiating terms. And so parapsychology is defined in the agreement as the scientific, so that's important, scientific, we're trying to be empirical about this, study of paranormal phenomena, in particular the capacity attributed to some individuals to interact with their environment by means other than the recognised sensory or motor channels. That's rather a long-winded way of saying that we're looking at attributions of paranormal experiences. So we're not saying for sure that these are definitely paranormal, we're saying that people interpret them as paranormal. And as a result, some of these experiences, in fact, perhaps the vast majority, if not all of them, may be misattributions. There may be perfectly normal psychological explanations for them. And there may also be, and we should take seriously the possibility that there are genuine psychic abilities. And these are the sorts of things that we study at the KPU. Now, the science of ghosts. Actually, I'll go up a little bit before I go into that. So what I want to do now is just describe that the KPU's had dozens of PhD students who've gone through. We've had a number of research staff. There's masses of undergraduate projects. So there's lots and lots of different things going on. I'm only going to give you one picture of one thing that we've done recently. And it's the Science of Ghosts project, did with Richard Wiseman, and Gordon Rutter was part of it as well from the Fortean Society. And it was done for the Edinburgh Science Festival last year, and it was a project to try to engage as many members of the public as possible in an online study of ghostly experiences. And how this occurred was by putting up online a questionnaire where we asked people to respond, give us a description of their ghostly experiences, what were they like, age, sex, their demographic characteristics, And then what were the experiences like? So I'm trying to get a picture of it's like a census, if you like, a little survey of ghostly experiences. We also asked the public to send in ghostly photographs. And Richard set up this blog called scienceofghosts.com. It still exists. We're not posting pictures to it anymore. It's kind of there though, with hundreds of ghost pictures that have been sent in, so you can look at it. I'll put the web address up at the end. And what happens is we put pictures up, and then we've got experts and members of the public to look at the pictures. And you know, in blogs you can add comments. So we had the public, hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people, taking part, putting in comments, discussing what were the possible explanations for these pictures that were being sent in. Were they photographic anomalies? Were they really mysterious pictures? So that was part of the Science of Ghosts publicity, if you like, the engagement of the project. And we then had a whole day event of talks at the Science Festival where we discussed the results of this and had various other experts, including historians and photographers, come along to discuss the Science of Ghosts at the Science Festival. So this is the result of the survey that we took. And M down at the bottom there, that means the number of people who took the survey was about 3,200 individuals filled out our questionnaire. And one of the first things that's kind of obvious from the figures there is that, well, someone says, I experienced a ghost, I saw a ghost, we usually think they're talking about a visual experience. But that's actually not always the case. Maybe about half of the experiences are visual, but a large number of the experiences are multisensory, so it might be visual and they hear something, or they might not have any visual sense at all. They might feel a presence. The second largest category there is a sense of a presence where you don't see anything at all, you just feel as if something's there and someone's watching you. These numbers don't add up to 100% because people will check more than one category. So that just to make the point that ghostly experiences come in all sorts of shapes and forms, from smells, touches, feelings, feeling even uneasy. Someone's got his hand up.
What do you mean by apparatus? Sorry.
Apparatus, that was where people were asked whether or not they experienced malfunctioning apparatus, so it might be like light bulbs flickering or computers breaking down, and they would interpret these as ghostly experiences. So they'd say that things are malfunctioning, my house is haunted. And not that uncommon, really, that kind of experience. We also looked at who has these experiences, and we found these patterns basically replicate what's been observed in previous surveys. So the majority are female. This could be due to reporting bias, because women tend to be more readily willing to report these experiences. Interesting, a huge percentage of people who have apparitional experiences are recently bereaved. Okay, so these are, they're actually, this is not just in our survey. We found, if you look in the literature, for instance, the British Medical Journal surveys of doctors, GPs reporting these experiences, they're interpreted as hallucinatory experiences. The recently bereaved are hallucinating their deceased spouse, usually. It's people who've lived together for a long time hallucinate the presence or the ghost of their dead spouse. Very, very common experience. 60% alone, not surprising, but what was surprising was that 40% of cases, it was claimed that other people were there as well, and I thought that was very unusual. Everything else in this is the same, has previously been found, but this high percentage of cases where people said there were others present is unusual, and we looked into that a bit further. So I emailed everybody who'd said that they'd seen or had their ghostly experience with other people and tried to get a little bit more information about what happened. And what I found is that in many cases these were people who were part of ghost hunting groups. Now that's a relatively recent occurrence. Now there's kind of craze of ghost hunting. Everybody goes around in groups and they go do vigils, and they all kind of get themselves nervous in the middle of the night. They see flashes of light and things move, and they get, you've seen this sort of thing on television. I think that is the explanation for why there's an increase. It never used to be as big as that. It might have been 10% before, and I think it's the popularity of ghost hunting experiences. As normal with paranormal experiences, they seem to occur more frequently when people are relaxed or in a sort of automatic state rather than being fully alert. So the question then is why? Why do people have these experiences? We established that they are having them, so what's the reason for them? Well, this is where we come to psychology, and it's really about the fact that our perception of the world is actually not what's out there, it's a construction. We have to work, our brain works to make us understand the world. And our understanding of the world, our experience of the world is really constructed from a combination of two different types of input. What you might call top-down, which are our expectations, how we understand the world to work, what we believe is going to happen, and bottom-up, our sensory inputs, flashes of light, sounds, smells, and so on. And the combination of these, and it's quite a complicated combination of these, which we normally do a very good job of integrating and navigating in a very efficient way around our world, can lead us to have apparitional experiences. So I'm taking a sceptical position here and saying that there are good psychological explanations for these. Now, those of you who saw Richard Wiseman's talk, I must apologise because I'm about to use the same demonstration as he did. He used it as a sort of warm-up, but I'm using this to illustrate an example of top-down processing. Top-down processing. What we've done there is add the words that basically shape our understanding, our perception of the sounds, which is quite hard to tell what the choral lyrics are. I think it might even be Latin, actually. So we can shape that, and there are lots of other demonstrations out there. There's this whole stream on YouTube called Misheard Lyrics. So if you go and search for misheard lyrics, you'll find lots of examples of that. So our perception of that, and once you've heard it that way, unfortunately, you probably never hear it any other way again. Yeah, so sorry about that. So that's an example of top-down processing. And our perceptions, our understanding of the world is also shaped by expectancy, what we call schemas in psychology. It's a cluster of concepts or attributes that go together. For example, if you think of babies at bath time, you might think of talcum powder and towels and hot fluffy towels and warm water. If we've got Ghostbusters going on and we ask ourselves who you're going to call, well, a little word flashed up there. Some of you might have seen the word Ghostbusters. It was actually Ghost Dusters, so I'm hoping that you misperceived that because of your expectation of what was going to come up. And this is very much how we perceive the world. We sort of take little shortcuts, and most of the time it works quite well. Whenever we have something that we're very skilled at, such as reading, we do a great job of reading, for example, sentences that have got words missing, letters missing. So if you've got half of the letters missing, you can still make good sense. Look at this one here, I'm afraid of no ghosts. Hopefully some of you have noticed that there actually are two ofs in that sentence there. So you skip past that because you're familiar with the, well, if you know anything about Ghostbusters, you're familiar with the phrase. This is a lovely example. We're also terribly good at reading meaning or making sense of what are actually random or meaningless shapes and patterns. And this looks like a beautiful picture. So it is actually a lovely photograph. It looks like a fish. There's actually a pond, rippling pond, with a reed that's curving over from the right to left, if you like. So we've got the curving reed, and then the wavy line below it, which forms the bottom half of the fish, is like the reflection of the reed. So can you all see that? That is actually a reed in the water and not actually a fish. It's quite hard not to see the fish, but it's actually a reed in a pond. Actually, it's more than one reed, several reeds in a pond. Beautiful photograph. Okay, we're extremely good at doing that, at making sense of our environment. And interestingly enough, there was a little thing, I didn't listen to the interview, but there was a review of it on Radio 4 about the interview with Richard Gregory, and they were talking about people who've had many years of blindness. And just saying that if you've had almost a lifetime of blindness, and then you can suddenly see, it takes a long time to learn how to see. We sort of take it for granted. Oh yes, I know that that's a computer and that's a chair and that's a person. But if you haven't learned that from childhood and you suddenly become able to see when you're an adult, it's really difficult to make sense of your world. We're doing this all automatically. We're kind of used to it now. Another thing which, as I'll show you in a minute, particularly relevant for ghostly experiences and ghostly photographs, is humans. Now there's a little bit of debate over this, but let's just say we are hardwired to perceive faces. We're particularly good at spotting faces, and there's evidence of this from birth in newborn babies. So babies that are only 2 to 5 days old, if they're given the choice of looking at someone who's looking at them versus someone whose eyes are averted, they prefer looking at the person who's looking at them. If you look at babies' brains, by 2 months there appear to be areas of the brain that are particularly activated, especially activated by looking at faces. 4-month-old babies seem to be doing a lot of face processing ahead of anything else that they're looking at. And these 2 pictures there, if you were to give a newborn baby a balloon with either the left or the right shape on it, the baby would prefer looking at the left one rather than the right one. The left one looks face-like, the right one doesn't look face-like. So there's this preference right from the word go. And there are also specific neurological problems that can cause a person to recognise everything in their environment except for faces. So we seem to have something special about faces. And I suppose you could think of good evolutionary reasons why that would be so. And for that reason, we see faces everywhere. And this has actually got a name. It's called pareidolia. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it properly. But we see faces, and we've got a happy car there, a happy bread maker, and even a happy cookie. But it's not just happy faces. We sometimes get sad faces. Sad banana. And perhaps one of the most famous faces is the face on Mars. Of course, that's just us making sense of shadows and bumps in the terrain on Mars. So, in the Science of Ghosts experiment I was telling you about, we got the public to send ghostly photographs in, and we got lots of good face examples. And I just want to show you a few of these. So this one was sent in. It's not the 2 kids that I'm talking about. It's the face in the background that's circled by red, in the red line, the face of the water. And if you do a close-up of that, you can see that the face, I wish I had a pointer, I don't suppose anyone's got a laser pointer on them. The face is composed of 2 rocks. That's a rock there, and that's a rock there, in a river, and they've got some leaves up against them, and it's a light area because the reflection in the river is of areas of trees and areas of sky. So it just so happens that's how we make sense. We're making sense of that series of random shapes. And it was sufficiently striking to the individual who took the photograph that they sent it in to us, and were quite disturbed about it. They wondered if their children were haunted. One of the most common ones are these faces in mists. Mist is obviously very, has a ghostly association. It's also a very random sort of shape, and it's very easy. So this one was sent to us as a demon in the mist, and I don't know if you can see 2 eyes up there, a nose and a mouth. I thought that, well, we weren't really sure what the explanation was, but it seemed to me as if most of these mist photographs were A, taken at night, and B, taken in cold weather. And I just wondered if it's the breath of the photographer, and as your breath steams and it's reflecting in the flash of the camera. Maybe not, it might be a cigarette, I don't know, but it seemed to often be at night and in the dark that you were getting these sorts of ghostly, but probably random faces. This is a nice one, Ghost in the Rocks. A lot of these happen as a projection onto a random shape, and you probably can't see where the ghost is, but I'll give you a little, there's the face there. Here, looks a bit like Bono, which is, it's in there. It's amazing they actually spotted it.
I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Oh, I think you have to sing that now.
So yeah.
So, I don't know, I'm amazed they actually found that. That's good, I might use that next time. Here's a plastered ghost. This is just, so it could be anything. We had people send us doors that had, the grain of the wood with the ghostly face. This one, drying plaster, and the 2 eyes, the nose, and the ghostly mouth, and the drying plaster. My favourite one which was sent to me by someone who said it totally freaked him out. It was really scary face. I can't see the face. It was sent to me by a Mr. Tom Coward, so I don't know if that's a clue. But anyway, really scary face. Yeah, you go for it. I just couldn't find a face there, which is actually quite an achievement because we're usually quite good at finding faces. Now everybody's trying. All right. Honestly, you should know better, really. Okay, this is the best one, okay, I think. This wasn't sent to us. This is kind of like an old example. The face of Jesus. So this is a kind of old Victorian photograph. And we've got a nose, eyes, and a kind of long, wavy hair. Do you see the face? Okay. That's, again, our imposition onto this photograph. And if I show you the photograph again, recoloured, those of you who haven't seen this, maybe some have, we can start to make some sense of it. So it's a couple, the baby on their knee, the hat. And this, what was the wavy hair of Jesus, is just foliage or a bush or something in the background. It's a really nice example. And you reflect between the two. It's actually almost impossible when you go back to this one, you're trying to see the baby on his knee. The baby has...
I can't see in the coloured one.
Well, let me just show you where the baby is. There's its white hat there, a little yellow face, white t-shirt, 2 arms, and you can't really see the legs, but it's sitting on the father's knee. You can't see it.
Oh no, I could see it at first, and now all I can see is the face.
Contaminated, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's a great one.
It looks like the Joker.
So just to sum up, I was talking about psychological influences on our perceptions. We see with our brains, not just with our eyes. And it feels as if we see with our eyes. Actually, we're working very hard to make sense of our environment. And our perceptions are shaped very much by our expectancies. That might be why people who believe in the paranormal are more likely to think they've seen or experienced a ghost. And likewise, I suppose, if you have a strong belief in another direction, if you believe that there's no such thing as ghosts, you might misperceive a real ghost as something else. It can work both ways if you've got strong beliefs one way or the other. And this automatic processing that we normally do, it usually works very well, but sometimes it misleads us. And if there's an ambiguous pattern, shapes of light and dark in random or badly lit environments, then we're particularly good at reading meaning into them to try and make sense of them. Faces, figures, footsteps, these are the sorts of things that are most easily misinterpreted as ghostly. So that was the top down. Now I'm going to say a little bit about bottom up effects. So this is really, if you like, sensory inputs. And sensory inputs, well, we'd like to think these are all pure and reflect the outside world. But they kind of can get mangled on the way through if we subject ourselves to various tortures.
The problem is all inside your head, she said to me. The answer is easy if you take it logically. I'd like to help you in your struggle to be free. There must be 50 ways to leave your lover. She said it's really
This is a lovely song. But anyway, just to make the point, thanks to Barry Firestein, who's given us a long list of these. Some people do this deliberately, put their bodies through various types of extreme physical circumstances, sexual abstinence, social isolation, fasting, dehydration, in order to deliberately produce strange experiences which they may interpret as visionary experiences or prophetic experiences. So shamans, drumming, repeated dancing, hyperventilation, repetitive stimuli, all of these things can distort our senses. And as I said, some people deliberately do that in order to have what they would interpret as a paranormal experience. But you and I can do it too, not necessarily paranormal. I should mention a little bit about Michael Persinger, who's a Canadian parapsychologist. I'm a little bit sceptical about his claims, but I'll just tell you what they are anyway. He claims that sensed presences, strange paranormal experiences, can be caused, not in every single case, but can be caused by abnormal activity in the temporal lobe of your brain. He says that this tends to often be associated with people who've had brain injury or epilepsy, and that if you artificially stimulate a person's brain with transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is what that diagram is showing, you have a big strong magnet on the outside of the brain, you can influence the inside of the brain, then you can induce these experiences. This is what's popularly been called the God helmet. And Sue Blackmore, for example, went through this and claimed that it was such a strong, powerful sense presence that she had when she did this experiment with him, that it couldn't possibly be a placebo effect. However, Persinger isn't very good at running control conditions in his experiments, where he tells people that the equipment is not switched on, so it could actually be a placebo effect in my view. So I'm not convinced about this. It's certainly, the claim is out there in the literature that some ghostly experiences can be caused by something that's happening in the temporal lobe of the brain. There's quite an interesting literature. There's a long history of people who are explorers who have had ghostly companions who've either a sort of, if you like, a doppelganger or a spirit, and I think there are sometimes names given to these spirits that accompany people who are really in extreme circumstances. They might be in whiteouts or be starved and half dead. And Hilary would be one of the many who've reported these experiences. And there have actually been a couple of publications in neuroscience journals about these mystical experiences, either in extreme altitude climbers or in people who go and sit on the top of mountains in order to get mystical insights. So that's there too. But what about us normal folks? So we're not gurus, we're not extreme altitude climbers. We can still have hallucinatory experiences. In fact, it's not that uncommon. We've probably all had at least one. So just stress, anxiety, bereavement, as we said, half the people who've bereaved have had hallucinatory experiences, sleeplessness, and events in the normal sleep-wake cycle. So there's a sort of if you like, a continuum of consciousness. So it's not suddenly that we're awake and then we're suddenly asleep. There's a kind of transitional area where strange things can happen. Sleep paralysis, I think Chris Fringe might have mentioned this when he was here. Sleep paralysis, most of us will experience this at least once in our lives. Hands up who's had a sleep paralysis experience. Yeah, it's about a third of the audience, maybe half even. I've had one too. It's quite interesting. But it can be very scary as well, if you're not into sleep paralysis. But these other cultures, this is a kind of universal experience. It's interpreted in different ways. So there's different terms used in China: the ghost press bed in Japan, the kanishibari spirit in Thailand, the mischievous Pium spirit. There's the Mara Wrath in Scandinavia, old hag in Mexico, something called the dead climbing on top in Mexican, witch pressing, incubus and succubus. And modern times, Chris French would argue that in modern times, the way that we've made sense of these experiences is to talk about alien abductions, and the sense that when you're asleep, you're kind of immobilized and then strange things are done to you. He would say is an example of modern day sleep paralysis. So we put the cultural overlay, if you like. Everybody's having an experience, and we're trying to make sense of it within our own cultural experience. Something we all have on the borderline between awake and sleep is hypnagogic and hypnagogic imagery. So we get particularly vivid imagery as we're drifting off to sleep or waking up. You can get sounds and voices. You can hear speech. You can have something called exploding head syndrome, which sounds horrible. You can have sleep paralysis at this point, and everybody has hypnagogic and hypnagogic imagery. And there tends to be a disruption of reality testing. So if something vivid occurs to you, you're not sure if it's real or if it was internally generated. And these kinds of experiences can be interpreted as ghostly experiences, and quite often ghost experiences are reported like something standing at the end of the bed, for example. It's very common, a figure standing at the end of the bed, or something in the bedroom, something around the bed. So it's likely that these sorts of factors are important. I want to wrap up now by saying a little bit about the Great Tantallon Castle investigation, which was the culmination, if you like, of the science of ghosts. And this was done with Richard Wiseman. So as part of the science of ghosts, we were getting people to send photographs in, and this guy called Christopher Aitchison sent in this photograph. And he said, I didn't notice it at the time, and by the way, this is typical of these photographs, that the photographer takes a photograph that includes a figure that they said wasn't there at the time that they took the photograph. Now, there is such a thing as it's been called photographer blindness, in that if you're not focusing, if you're not paying attention to a particular area of the photograph, there might well be things happening there that you completely miss. It's a bit like the gorilla demonstration playing basketball. Some of you don't know what I'm talking about, but it's going to sound very strange. So Chris took this photograph, and it was only when he got home, and he was quite a good photographer, he had a fancy camera, and when he looked at the picture, he noticed this figure up in the ramparts of the castle there. And this is a blow-up of it. It looks kind of weird figure. And he sent it in because he didn't think there should be a figure up there, and it looked strange, and he didn't think it was there when he took the photograph. So the team investigated. Ashley, Richard, Christopher Aitchison is the guy in the blue, and well, it was blooming freezing out there if you ever go to St Helens Castle in March. So what we did is we actually did a couple of site visits, but the one that I'm going to tell you about, Richard Wiseman got in touch with Chris Aitchison, who'd sent him the photograph, and he was very game. He was from Glasgow, which was quite handy. Said he'd come along with his camera, with the one he took the photograph in, and we tried to recreate the photograph. Now that's not as easy as it sounds, because, for example, you can see that this particular time of year there's light coming in at the top, so the top part of the castle is illuminated, the rest in shadow, and that could make a difference. And it turned out it did make a difference, because to the left of that opening where you can see the figure, there's an archway, and then there's a kind of passageway, and at certain times of day the sun shines through there. And so we had to try and get the right time of day as well as the right time of year to get the right angle. We got lucky, it's the right time of year. So we got Chris back, and we got Richard to essentially wear a dark cape and to dress as a ghost. And Richard went up, there's a spiral staircase, and we stood at the bottom. Chris, the photographer, kind of went to where he remembered taking the photograph from, so we had the right position, we had the right lighting, because we were lucky, it was sunny that day, we had the right sort of angle. And we got Richard to sort of up, right a bit, left a bit, down a bit, up a bit, and took loads of photographs. And this is what we came up with. That's the ghost on the left, and that's Richard on the right, up there. So we've got a very, very nice, in my view, replication of the ghostly photograph. And the reason why it's kind of ghostly is because at that time of day with the sun shining in, the face somehow lights up, and that's simply because it's a dark passageway, wearing a dark jacket, but the light was shining through that opening that I mentioned before, so the face was kind of spotlit in a way you wouldn't normally expect it, and that's why it kind of catches your eye. So now that's not saying that this is not a ghost. All it's saying is that by playing around with the camera and the angles and everything, there's no fakery in terms of the photoshopping on this at all. And this photograph was looked at by experts who said there was no sign of Photoshop on it. But we were able to recreate something that looked very close to the original picture. So that, obviously when people say, oh, what do you do in Koestler Parapsychology Unit, I always say, we don't do ghost busting. But, okay, this is one example where we do ghost busting. So just to sum up, the theme of this, people have ghostly experiences. And people have them because of a combination of top-down processes, where our expectancies and our normal understanding of the world can lead us to misinterpret ambiguous stimuli. And also bottom-up processes in that our senses can mislead us. They can be distorted depending on what's going on in our brain, particularly if our normal reality checking is impaired, if we're half asleep, half awake, for example, or if we're drugged at all. So a combination of these factors, I think, can produce ghostly experiences. Now that's not to say that they're all ghostly experiences are explained in that way. I think that the vast majority of them are. And I certainly don't want to say, I don't want to come across as saying people who have these experiences and who send in photographs to us are stupid or gullible. I don't think they are. I think they're just trying to make sense within their belief system. They're trying to make sense of the experiences that they've had. And as I said, for most of us, for most of the time, our brain processes, our psychological processes work well. It's just every now and then, as with visual illusions, a good example of why and how things could go wrong with our sensory processing. Now, if you want to learn any more about parapsychology, I run an online course, and you can find out about that on the internet. I have an introductory textbook, and also have a Twitter stream. I've been dragged reluctantly into the 21st century with that. And I'd also just like to say thank you to everybody in the public who contributed to the Science of Ghosts project. And that's the website there, Science of Ghosts, if any of you want to look up. Look at all the photographs and all the commentary and discussion about the photographs. It's all still live on the web. And thanks to my sons for helping with the technical stuff. And thank you, Edinburgh Skeptics, for inviting me to talk, and thank you all for listening.
We do have time for Q&A.
Excellent. You're going to take a few questions?
Sure, we've got time.
Excellent. So we've got time for a few questions if anyone has some questions for Cameron.
What's exploding heads?
I don't know, is anyone know? I think it's you hear loud noises, and it sounds like really loud explosions right at your head, and it sounds like a horrible experience, but it's associated with this falling asleep and waking up. So some people would say, I'm having these really loud noises, and I'll record them for you. You know, and they put their recorder under their pillow to try and catch the noises, and you know, you're not getting anything apart from the odd little rustle. So yeah, they're sort of incredibly loud noises, but they're not actually, no one else can hear them. So.
Sounds horrible.
It does sound horrible. It's a horrible name as well. So, sure.
Hi, I just recently bought your book, so maybe it's in there. But are there theories, proper scientific theories of what actually is a ghost? So for example, when people say, I'm having an out-of-body experience and I'm floating up in the sky and I can see them operating on my body, what exactly is doing the seeing? You know, that's the question I ask. You know, because to see something there has to be an eye, and there has to be a brain, there has to be something to, you know, for the light to go into. So is there a theory of how that sort of thing, you know, what's going on there, or is it just we don't know, but isn't this interesting?
I don't think there's any strong contender for an explanation. You know, for a sort of in physical terms, an explanation for what it is. I mean, you can think of psychological explanations like Sue Blackmore would for the OBE, right. That it's our map of where we are, our kind of understanding of where we are, because I'm inside my body, I'm standing up and so on, can get disrupted, and in that sort of situation you can flip to a different view. And that experience can be recreated using virtual reality goggles, where you can get a person to wear virtual reality goggles, and they see a figure in front of them, and if you kind of do the right kind of induction, they can start to think that they're the figure in front of them. So you can flip a person out of their body. So I mean, the likelihood is a psychological experience. But you know, the question is there a strong alternative paranormal explanation? Yeah. Paranormal, as in, doesn't yet fit in with what we know about physics. No, there isn't. When people talk about, we'll use our electromagnetic activity measurement to go around and sort of in the haunted area to see if there's any peak of electromagnetic activity, but there's no theory that says that ghosts consist of electromagnetic activity. So that's part of the problem. We don't actually have a good theory of what a ghost is in order to measure it. You know, so you have people who will go and they'll sit in a room at night and they'll try and measure radioactivity and temperature and so on. And we don't really have any way of making sense of these measurements. So no, there's not really. That's still to be done.
Quantum physics, I thought.
Well, yes, yes.
Just those two words, that's it.
Yeah, quantum physics. Yes, no, that would help. we could probably do something like that, but yes.
I have two questions. One, what was your proposal that you said, you know, when you won the best? When they asked you what would be your project for the Koestler Society when you were a student?
Oh yes, okay. Can I answer that question first before we go to the second one? So the question was, when I answered the exam question 20-something years ago, 26 years ago, oh my god, 26 years ago, what did I say? And I said something about looking at research into twins, telepathy in twins. And I was also interested in, I think it's because I'd read a Lyle Watson book, I wanted to look at a telepathy between animals, and the idea that if you, probably we'd never get ethical clearance, but there was this claim that if you killed baby rabbits, the mother rabbit would, randomly killed baby rabbits, the mother rabbit would show some sort of reaction. And so I was interested in doing something like that. And your second question?
What do you think is the most interesting for you, like in paranormal? What excites you most? What do you think would constitute in future the big breakthrough if there would be any? What would you would tell Koestler if he would?
Yeah, I mean, so I would probably not. I would look at the laboratory research to. That's the sort of $60,000 question. Is there any evidence for psi? And I think you can't really answer that question when you're looking at what we call spontaneous experiences, paranormal experiences, because we can't know all of the conditions that led to that experience. We can't control it. So I would always look at lab research, and even though that's artificial and maybe you lose something in creating an artificial situation. And of the lab research, the only research that I think is intriguing is the Ganzfeld psi research. There are pockets of significant data there, and there's a meta-analysis just come out in Psychological Bulletin in July of this year, which is sort of continuing that debate. There's been a lot of debate for and against whether or not there really is. But I think that at the moment is parapsychology's best effort. The problem is that parapsychologists are their own worst enemies in some respects, because they jump from one paradigm to another. So instead of everybody focusing on the Ganzfeld, and I'm
what is that?
Sorry. Ganzfeld is it's a mild sensory deprivation procedure, and some people might have seen pictures of it where a person has ping pong balls on their eyes and red light shone in their face. That's the person who's acting as the receiver. So it's basically trying to recreate a hypnagogic or hypnopompic state, getting a person very relaxed and into a situation where they're starting to experience a lot of mental imagery. So it's trying to recreate this sort of dreamlike situation where people report psychic experiences. While they're in that situation, stimulation, unpatterned sensory stimulation, starting to see and experience images, somebody else in a different room is acting as a sender, and they look at a randomly chosen target. So it might be a film clip, for example, that's been randomly chosen from a pool of 100 film clips, and they try to mentally communicate the contents of that target to the person who's in the Ganzfeld, who's speaking out loud saying, I see a circle, I see a red square, I see horses, whatever, they're giving a description of their experience. So that's the basic paradigm. Afterwards then there's sort of blind judging, where the person who's having the Ganzfeld experience, who's reporting out loud what they're experiencing, they look at 4 video clips and they don't know which one was the actual target, and they have to try and judge which of the 4 was closest to what they were experiencing while they were in the Ganzfeld. And by chance alone, you'd know that 25% of the time they just get it right, just through luck. And so what you're doing is you then use statistics over a number of trials and a number of different participants to say, do we have a greater than chance identification of the target? So it all boils down to statistics in the end, which you can't do in spontaneous cases. It's too complicated. So we've got a very simple situation. So I think Ganzfeld are the strongest body of experiments. There's probably about 30 years worth of studies. But parapsychologists instead jump to another paradigm. So the thing that's trendy now is called presentiment. Presentiment is about, the argument is that the Ganzfeld is a cognitive effort. You're trying to be psychic, basically, and that we should actually look for unconscious measures of psi. And presentiment would argue that what you do is your body can respond to psychic information, and these experiments present somebody with a powerful target. Might be a very emotional picture, such as someone who's just been in a car accident, and so they're all maimed and disfigured. And we all have a horrible physiological reaction if we look at a picture like that. And what the presentiment paradigm is, you look for the physiological reaction in the milliseconds before the picture is actually shown. And the idea is that the claim is that your body is anticipating the future shock, if you like, that's about to happen to it. And that if the experiment is properly conducted and you intersperse the powerful pictures with neutral pictures, and you can look at the anticipation before each one, that people are showing an anomalous anticipation to the emotional stimuli and not to the neutral stimuli. But it's a very young paradigm, that, so I think it's too soon to say whether or not that's going to be successful. And this is the history of parapsychology, of sort of moving from one thing to the other. So we'll have to sort of see what happens with presentiment.
Excellent. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for. If anyone's got any more questions, then I'm sure Caroline might be in the bar afterwards.
I will
You can exchange drinks for questions or something like that. So if we could just thank Caroline again.